Hi everyone, we'd like to welcome you here to this Catholics from the COP webinar by CIDSE and GCCM. This is the second CIDSE GCCM Catholics from the COP webinar, and the last one was in Marrakesh. You might have joined us there too. My name is Cliona Sharkey. I'm a policy advisor with Trócaire based in Ireland. And I'm going to be moderating the webinar today. So these webinars at the COP are a great opportunity for the Catholic community, whether here at the COP or all around the world, to come together and take stock of what's happening here at the UNFCCC and what does it mean for us in our work on climate justice. So as you can imagine, this is the start of the second week of the COP, so the negotiations are hotting up. The issues that are going to be on the agenda of the ministers when they arrive in the next days are becoming clearer, and we'll come to that later in the discussion. The number of people here has increased exponentially in the last day or two. We're in the Bondi zone here at the COP in a place called the Talanoa space. Talanoa is a Fijian word, and we're delighted to have a representative from Fiji here with us today, one of our speakers, Reverend James Bhagwan, here beside me. And Fiji is actually the president of this year's COP, which is really important because it's the first presidency of the COP from a small island developing state, and that's really important from a climate justice perspective. So we're going to talk about that as well. So I don't want to take long, we only have the hour, so I'm keen to move on to our speakers. Just to mention, we will have questions and answers at the end, so I would invite you to send your questions via chat message, and we'll come to those at the end, so don't forget to send your messages. So, before moving on to our speakers, I suppose just to remind ourselves where we are in the UNFCCC context, COP23, 2 years on from Paris, and importantly for our community, 2 years on from the launch of Laudato Si. Where are things at? Where are things at from a climate justice perspective? So just to give you a sense of who we have with us today, and I'd like to thank all our speakers for being here with us today. We have Reverend James Bhagwan from the Methodist Church in Fiji. We have Giulia Bondi, Climate Justice and Energy Officer with CIDSE. Giulia is Italian, living in Brussels. We have Saño. Yeb is actually the former UN climate negotiator for the Philippines. He is now the Executive Director of Greenpeace for Southeast Asia. Finally, then we have Tomás Insua, Executive Director of GCCM, and who is, as you know, from Argentina. So we'll jump right in. Again, don't forget your questions, send them by chat message. Each of our speakers have about 7 minutes, so we'll try to keep to time. So Reverend Bhagwan, it is a pleasure to have you here. Thank you so much for being here, and I give you the floor.
Thank you very much. It's great to be here. I'll greet you with our traditional Fijian greeting, which is Mbula Vinaka. And see, I say Mbula Vinaka, there's applause in the background from something else, of course. But Mbula Vinaka is taken from two Fijian words. Mbula means life, and Vinaka means good, means healthy. So when we say Mbula Vinaka to someone, we wish them a good life, a healthy life, and life in abundance. And it's interesting that the negotiations are taking place in the Mbula zone, because that means they're taking place in the life zone. And I like to think of it in that sense. You know, we're here 2 years, as you said, after Paris. There's a lot of things on the agenda that need to be addressed, the rule book and a lot of other issues. And there's a sense of urgency for us in the Pacific because we need things to move fast. And I know that's always a challenge when there's a political scenario involved. There's negotiations and all the things that take place. But time is not on our side. In the Pacific, we have islands that if this business as usual continues for a little bit longer, won't exist. We have people who are losing their homes, their way of life. There is culture under threat. There is sovereignty under threat. And so the reality of climate change, you know, is something we live with in our island countries. We don't just have the issue of sea level rise. That's one. The other issues that we're facing, of course, along with other parts of the world, are extreme weather patterns. Cyclones. We had a devastating cyclone last year, Category 5. It was, I think, the second most powerful cyclone in the Southern Hemisphere in recorded history, if I'm not mistaken. We had one a year ago, the year before that in Vanuatu, another Pacific Island country. We have droughts, we have floods, we have the change of seasons in terms of planting. And so if you add all of that together, it's really a serious situation for those of us in the Pacific Islands. And what we're calling on the world to do in our Pacific way is to rethink the way that they live, rethink that the way that we do things. We were very glad when Laudato Si came out as a call for the Catholic community. I work closely with the Catholic community, although I'm a Methodist. I'm married to a Catholic, so that helps in some way, I guess. But the idea of making the correct choices that need to be made. Pope Francis calls for an ecological conversion, and we need to translate that into our daily practice. We need to translate that into political language as well, which is so important. In the Pacific, we talk about reweaving the mat. You know, in the Pacific, we sit on the floor. We spread mats out in our houses, in our homes. And these mats are woven not just by women, they can be woven by the community. Sometimes men are involved as well in the weaving of the mat. But when a mat gets old, we simply reweave. We can extend that mat, we can take out the broken threads and add in new threads. And so that provides us with a way to not just change the situation, but to restore it to the original condition or to a better condition. And so in terms of the ecological conversion, what we are thinking about in the Pacific is a ecological reweaving of the mat. So it's a reweaving not only of our ecological mats, of our economic mats, and with an issue like climate change, it's also a reweaving of our ecumenical mats. So we come together as faith communities, and we can have a stronger voice. If we and one of the things I've noticed is that there is a little bit more space now, not only for non-state actors, but there is a bit more of a space now for faith communities to enter into the conversation on addressing climate change. So I think the urgency is there. We can't afford for decisions that are supposed to happen in this COP to be put forward to next year, because that's another year wasted. And we hope that not only this COP, but what happens in the year between COP23 and COP24, when Fiji still has the presidency, is an important year in terms of making some of those shifts that need to take place.
James, thank you so much for that. I think it was such an appropriate beginning to our webinar, just that reminder of the how things are on the ground already today, and the moral imperative behind climate action. So the politics is complicated, but the moral call is very clear. And I really appreciated the beautiful analogy of the reweaving of the mats coming from Fiji. I hope that having had Fiji as the presidency, and that the continued presidency also throughout 2018, that some of that deep connection, community and to the earth will start to filter through. So thank you for that. I'd like to invite our next speaker. Giulia from CIDSE is going to join us next. And Giulia is following the negotiations quite closely. I know this because I'm constantly asking her questions about what's going on. So Giulia, I'd like to hand over to you, and you're just going to give us a sense of what's on the table, how are things going in relation to the agenda items at this COP. Thanks, Giulia.
Thanks, Cliona, and hello, everyone who is listening to this webinar. So we are here in the bond zone, but actually all the negotiations are happening in the Bula zone. And I've been asked to translate into a normal language what the negotiations are delivering at the moment. Maybe delivering is a stronger word. We still have to wait the end of this week, especially as of tomorrow when all the ministers will arrive and the high-level segment will start with more political discussions. So this COP, as Cliona said at the beginning, happens after 2 years of the Paris Agreement, and is very much focused on the need to advance with the Paris rule book, which are basically the guidelines to implement the Paris Agreement. In order to do that, initially called facilitative dialogue, then now translated into Talanoa dialogue with the Fijian word, is now on the table of discussions, and it's a process that needs that should lead to then hopefully an increase of the national pledges, so the so-called NDCs. Talanoa, as Cliona explained before, means inclusiveness, transparency. So these are also the spirit and yeah, the spirit that the Fijian presidency is trying to spread in the negotiations. And I must say, last week, the Fijian presidents organized the first open dialogue with non-state actors. So this was the first time that also the Fijian presidency and were listening to non-parties. And I think this was also a very good signals. Other items that are actually more political and will heat up a little bit more the debate in the next days are with regards to the loss and damage question, which is a very high priority for Fiji, as the previous speaker said before, due to the extreme climate impacts. And this is also linked to the question of the finance, so the finance needed for recovering from all the damages. Another still linked to finance, another important question is with regards to the so-called adaptation fund, which is an instrument for channeling money to projects that are meant to adapt to climate change. And the main question here is that whether it will become more operational in the Paris Agreement. And this is also an ask from the civil society. On the one hand, we as civil society, we are still pushing for the long-term finance needed after also 2020. So we know very well that in 2020, there should be a peak of the emissions and then afterwards a deeper reduction. So in order also to ensure that developing countries can deliver on the mitigation and adaptation needs, developed country needs to also pledge public finance in there. Another point of discussions, and I'm trying to be as simple as possible, although believe me, it's not an easy task, is with regards to the pre-2020 action again, and as explained before, is an important ask from developing countries, and this is really showing again the big divide that these negotiations have been characterized by, which is the big divide between the developed and the developing countries. So I think in the next days we will see a lot of heated debates and we will see how those different elements will deliver on. One important, on the positive note, I would say, yesterday there's been, after 5 years of technical discussions, an agreement on moving forward on the agriculture work stream, which is for the people who are following the work stream is a very like a big step forward, because agriculture is a very contentious issue. We know very well all the emissions coming from the agriculture sector, and therefore, yeah, it's important that also this work stream will be continuing to advance. Overall, I think that in terms of civil society asks, yes, we want political leadership, but at the same time, everyone needs to play a role. Because the urgency is now, it's not the future, it's the present. And this also means that citizens need to also showcase that alternatives are possible to face climate change. And also CITSE is something that is calling for, it's more of a shift into the lifestyle, now especially in the industrialized countries. And so it's important that we rethink the way we live and the way we consume and produce, especially energy and food. And is also, I must say, I've been hearing also this discourse now entering into more than negotiations, which is on the one hand, interesting because, and at the same time a bit worrying because it's true that the science is saying that the urgency is now. So that's a little bit, in a nutshell, what is happening in the Bula zone.
Thanks a lot, Giulia. I've been a little bit in the Bula zone, but a lot in the Bond zone, I have to say, at different events and meetings. And I've also been hearing a lot about the idea of the need for individual change and the need for systemic change, that both are so necessary. And in fact, individual change is a really important part of catalyzing the systemic change. So that's something really important, as you said, to ourselves and our communities and constituencies, because that's something where we can really get involved. And the point on pre-2020, yes, I've been hearing that a lot as well. The fact that actually we need to be peaking global emissions by 2020 to be able to get on a pathway to deliver on the Paris Agreement. So time is not with us, and every month that we wait has an impact. So every step that we take makes a real difference. So thanks a lot, Giulia. I'm going to invite Tomas. No, actually, I'm wrong. I'm sorry. I'm going to invite please to come and take a seat. So Yeb, as I said, was formerly the UN, the climate negotiator for the Philippines here at the UN FCCC negotiations, and is now the executive director of Greenpeace Southeast Asia. Yeb, thank you so much for joining us, and I know you're going to talk to us about why COP23 matters, and the urgency to act, the role of the faith-based community, and how we can contribute. So thanks for being here. Yeah.
Thank you, Cliona. Yes, I think the first order of the day is that we treat the climate change challenge for what it is, a crisis, and it is a crisis. And as such, we must act with boldness and with urgency. This is the first order of the day. I think governments must take this seriously. And if we are to look at the negotiations process in the UN, we've had significant gains, especially with the adoption and now with the entry into force of the Paris Agreement, heralding what we call a new era in international cooperation for solving the climate crisis. However, the Paris Agreement is obviously not enough, and it requires it requires more ambition from governments, but also the framework within which international agreements are made point to the fact that all of the actions that are going to be taken will have to depend on how rule books, for example, that are being negotiated here in Bonn are going to be developed, and that's going to take a bit more time. And then we see a lot of problems in recent months with a lot of countries actually stepping back from their commitments, and we see heads of states like President Trump walking away from the Paris Agreement. That is huge. And if we see a trend like that, and with the kind of political atmosphere that we see in many countries right now, it leads us to doubt whether the international political process is enough to solve the climate crisis. And that means for us, the solution to the climate crisis lies in concrete actions at the community level, at the grassroots. And it would require definitely the solidarity among faith-based groups. And we see a big role for faith communities all over the world to start taking action, not just concrete ways to avert the climate crisis, to live more sustainably, to promote the principles of ecological conversion in every community, but also to hold those responsible for this crisis to account. And there is a powerful, very powerful way for parishes, for churches, for local communities to actually rise up and hold the big polluters to account. And we are talking about those who have been identified to be responsible for a vast majority of the global warming gases in the atmosphere. And these are even below, number below 100 entities, including state-owned companies and investor-owned corporations. And it behooves us as people of faith to actually confront that injustice, because the climate crisis is the biggest injustice in human history. And in the context of what's happening here at COP23 in Bonn, I always find it amusing when we mention that number, 23. So it's been 23 years since we've been trying to solve this crisis, and every year it's still doubtful whether moving towards a real solution. Of course, we pay tribute to this process and praise it when it needs to be praised in the context of the small political gains that are being made in these negotiations. However, we know in our hearts that it's never enough, and this is a problem that's not going away, because we see the most recent years as being the warmest year on record. We see 2017, where coal production and consumption is going to be at its highest ever. So while there are signs that people are taking this more seriously, there are also signs that the people behind the climate crisis, those who have benefited from plundering the planet, are still going at it. And they're still intent on profiting at the expense of people and planet. So it is really important for us to be vigilant around this and to see the climate crisis not just as a scientific issue and a technical issue that will be solved by technical and scientific solutions. It is a reflection of a deep moral crisis. I think it was John Paul II who said that. It is a reflection of a deep moral crisis that will require a spiritual awakening in all of us for us to be able to confront and avert probably the most pervasive and biggest human challenge that we are facing. So this is also a manifestation of climate change being an issue of justice. Because this problem is here because those who are hugely responsible for it are powerful and wealthy, and those least responsible for this problem are those who are at the receiving end of its impacts. And that's a big injustice, and we cannot allow that to continue. And in the context as well of the first Pacific Conference of Parties happening with Fiji chairing this conference, this is a very opportune time for us to highlight the communities that have the biggest stake, who will lose the most if we fail to avert the climate crisis. The Pacific Islands are losing their homes, they're losing their cultures, entire populations to the adverse effects of climate change. And it's not just that; it's a whole lot of problems that these people are facing in an existential way. So in order for us to confront this injustice, we have to address injustice everywhere, and faith-based communities, churches, and parishes all over the world must stand up against every kind of injustice, must stand up in order for us to fight poverty, and must all be part of changing the system that has all but made the wealthy wealthier, and that's driven inequality around the world.
Thank you so much for that, Jeb. I think that was very powerful. And just again, bringing that human face of climate change. This is not a scientific issue, it's a moral crisis. I think that reference to moral crisis, and as Reverend James said, the call in Laudato Si for ecological conversion, and Pope Francis was speaking to every person on the planet. I think those are really quite profound. And coming back again to that idea of individual action and systemic individual change and systemic change, and the importance of doing what we can in our own lifestyle to make the changes in terms of our contributions to climate change, but actually the need to come together to take action, to create pressure, and to hold decision makers and the big polluters to account if we're really to deliver that systemic change. Yeah, thank you so much for that. I think you tied those different tracks for us, strategic tracks together really well. We appreciate that. Thank you. I'm going to invite Tomas to come and sit beside me. Before I do that, I would like to remind you to send your questions if you have them by the chat, and we'll come to those after. So Tomas, as you know, is the executive director of GCCM. Tomas is Argentinian, based still in the US. Currently in process of moving. Yep. So Tomas is going to speak to us about what's next for the Catholic community. So thanks, Tomas.
Hello, good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever you are. It's great to be here at COP23 again, another COP. It's as mixed feelings as on one side, as Yev said, it's the 23rd COP, so that's not really exciting. But, well, at the same time, here I think we've had a lot of good conversations with other faith groups and partners about what we're doing next, given that we have heard that governments are not doing what they need to do, and the importance of civil society and faith groups among them to step up to the game and do what is needed to solve the climate crisis. There have been lots of really good conversations about what's coming up next. So that's kind of, we'll be sharing a little bit about that. This upcoming initiatives for our GCCM network, Catholic leaders and communities around the globe and Catholic organizations to take this to the next level in terms of Laudato Si action for climate justice. So a couple of things that I'd like to share there in terms of upcoming initiatives. First, at the very short term, now in a couple of weeks, we'll have Advent. So expect, and as you know, usually for liturgical seasons, at GCCM, we prepare special resources for you to live the liturgical season through the lens of Laudato Si. So expect to receive in your email inboxes in a couple of weeks, actually next week, a very nice living Advent. I can't recall the exact number, the exact name, but it's a resource about living at the season of Advent with the joy of Laudato Si. So through the lens of Laudato Si. And we're pretty used, unfortunately, for Advent to being a season that is marked by consumerism, which is the exact opposite of the message of Pope Francis in Laudato Si. So hopefully we can start changing the narrative about what we're supposed to do in the Advent season. So then we're also, for the New Year's, we're expecting to do a new drive in terms of the Laudato Si Pledge. Many of you might be familiar with the campaign of the Laudato Si Pledge. We're hoping to motivate the Catholic community to live up the message of Pope Francis. So we're expecting, leveraging that a new year is coming up, and it's a good moment to make a new resolution. Expect also some invitations in terms of living out that pledge. At the same time, I'd love to encourage everybody to continue promoting the Laudato Si Pledge. It's a beautiful campaign to raise awareness about the Pope's message. So we really hope that throughout next year in 2018, in your local parish, your local community, you can continue to promote both the encyclical and the pledge as a concrete tool to take action. Another related and very nice initiative that we're coming up with is called the Laudato Si Tracker. So I'm delighted it's not a formal announcement, this is just a preview. We're putting together a new program called the Laudato Si Tracker, which is meant to support Catholic parishes and Catholic communities of all sorts that have buildings to reduce their energy use and to be more sustainable, and most importantly, to also track how they're living their Laudato Si Pledge commitments. So how they're doing in terms of engaging their community around Laudato Si education, ecological education, spiritual practices to incorporate Laudato Si in the spiritual life of the community, et cetera, et cetera. And we'll have something really exciting is that we'll have a set of Laudato Si awards next year. We'll be granting awards for those. We have 4 target audiences in the pledge: individuals, families, organizations, and parishes. So we'll be giving out awards for those Catholic leaders in different continents who are doing the most and are stories that should be shared. Then And this is very important to connect it to what is happening here at COP. You know that as governments are not doing what they're supposed to be doing, there will be this Global Climate Action Summit in California next September, which is will be a very important moment for non-state actors to showcase how they're taking climate action. So, and again, this is to counter the narrative that governments are not doing what they need to be doing. And we all know about the Trump administration pulling out from the Paris Agreement. So Governor Brown from California and the UNFCCC, the United Nations, and many other important institutions are convening a really big summit in California, in San Francisco next September. And the summit is supposed to be showcasing how different non-state actors are taking action, are taking bold climate action. And we want to show that the Catholic Church, the Catholic community, is responding to the Laudato Si message with very concrete action in the ground. So here I encourage all of you members of the GCCM network and CITSE network to start thinking of how we're living up. I mean, we're really driving emissions reductions in our own communities, how we're getting our parishes to install solar panels, to go energy efficient, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So the Laudato Si tracker will be a very concrete tool to help you in that journey. And we know it's a journey. It will take a couple of years to decarbonize, to go carbon neutral in our communities, but we have to get started. Then I would like to share also for next year a couple of things that are in the pipeline. First, the Laudato Si Animators program will have a new round of trainings, of online trainings. So we encourage you to start planning for that. It will happen throughout Lent mostly, preparing for Earth Day. And for Earth Day, we have two things we would like to invite our network here, our viewers. On one side, we'll have, as we did this year, you might remember the Mercy to Earth campaign that was timed for Earth Day. Next year, we're hoping to do another big drive showing how, and providing some useful tools and ideas to make creative, for you to host creative and engaging activities in your community and in your country, in your city, to engage the Catholic community with Laudato Si and with the Earth Day theme, given that Earth is our common home that Pope Francis is calling us to protect. So that is coming up. So start planning, book in your calendars, April 22nd. It's a Sunday. And second, that day we'll host another big fossil fuel divestment announcement. So those of you who are working for a Catholic institution, we'll host a very big joint announcement showing how Catholic institutions are divesting from fossil fuel corporations. We heard earlier from Yev how the fossil fuel industry has not been playing a very positive role in this whole climate conversation. So we're hoping that will be a very concrete way for Catholics to step up and deliver the message of the urgency to take action. So that's a short preview, and expect an email afterwards with a detailed outline of what I just shared. That will be much more helpful, and we'll have a couple of links to follow up. So thank you.
Thank you. You can stay where you are, Tomas, if that's okay. Thank you so much for that. I love the idea of the Laudato Si tracker, and going back again to that idea that like making the changes ourselves is great. It's important in terms of coherence with our values, but to be part of that systemic change, we need to talk about it. We need to shout about it. So those opportunities to showcase our work, to put it out there and show other people how it can be done is so important. So that's a really great opportunity for us to do that. So can I just ask you a very quick question, Tomas? We don't have too much time, so just a brief answer. You've been engaging in a lot of faith-based events and interfaith events while you've been here in Bonn. Can you say a little bit about what's coming out from the other faith constituencies in terms of next steps?
Totally. So great question. So yes, indeed, a couple of days ago, I attended together with Reverend James, a really beautiful interfaith gathering here in Bonn. And that's the beauty of creation care, climate action being a unifying theme for world faiths, world religions. There was a beautiful gathering, and we put together a statement, an interfaith statement that was signed by many leaders from different faiths, was delivered here in Bonn to the United Nations representative, sending a message from the faith community that this statement was very focused on sustainable lifestyles and the need to transform our lifestyles. But it was really wonderful. Actually, we had a whole procession with bicycles and rickshaws illustrating what sustainable lifestyles look like. So that happened last Friday. And going back to the California summit I mentioned, the San Francisco summit, there will be another big interfaith push ahead of that summit. Actually, in San Francisco, there will be a very nice, expected to be a very nice interfaith service and interfaith action. So we are here adding a Catholic voice to this wider interfaith movement for climate justice. So we want to show how we Catholics are, up to ready to do what it takes. And regarding action in other communities, I would say that it depends a lot, tradition by tradition or religion by religion. I would say that overall, probably the Protestant churches, the other Christian communities are definitely ahead of us, Catholics. We need to catch up. We heard earlier from this Methodist minister from Fiji. Overall, the World Council of Churches and many of the Protestant, Anglican, and Orthodox communities are doing a lot. So we Catholics need to catch up. And now that we have this strong call to action from Laudato Si', I think we have no excuse for inaction. So that's in a nutshell.
Great, thanks. Yeah, absolutely. And I guess that's why you're all there and we're all here and we're all part of building that movement, that momentum. And that's such an important message. So thank you, Tomas. I'm going to quickly invite my other speakers to just come back briefly for a moment, and don't forget to send your questions if you have them. Giulia, just to ask you a quick question, the idea of non-state actors is coming up again and again. Can you just give a sense of, since the Paris Agreement, there is more emphasis on non-state actors. What evidence do you see of that here within the negotiations?
Thank you, Cliona. The role of non-state actors is becoming more and more prominent and important in this space. Marrakesh Partnership, which is this series of events on climate action, and where many different stakeholders kind of engaged and trying to promote more resilient, kind of energy shift, finance, on transport, on agriculture. So this is one part that is actually linked with the negotiations. But I think, and from our perspective in CITSE, the most important part is the role of the civil society. Just at the beginning of this COP, there's been 3 days of events in a space called the People Climate Summit, which was a very dynamic and interesting space where many ordinary citizens decided to come and participate in different events, discussing coal issues, food insecurity, discussing also about lifestyle changes. So I can see that this is really becoming more and more prominent in all the discussions. On the one hand, I also believe that the role of politics is still very important, and the role of policymakers is important, because especially consumers needs to be put on a situation where they are able to decide, and this can only be possible with the good policies in place. So on the one hand, yes, an active engagement from the so-called non-state actors, the civil society. On the other hand, also more stronger political action for making it more effective.
Thanks, Giulia. Can I invite you back to join us just for a moment? Thanks. I suppose want to take advantage of your deep knowledge and experience of the UNFCCC process. Could you say a little bit about what difference it makes for negotiators, for the intergovernmental negotiations, to know that there are faith communities here at the COP and engaging with the UNFCCC, whether from afar or here at the conference centre. Does it make any difference? What do you think?
Well, our theory of change around that question is how we affect national delegations both here at this forum and also back home. And I'd like to believe that in both venues we can be very, very effective, and we can engage governments meaningfully. I, for a fact, from experience, know that, for example, my own government, the Philippines, has responded quite meaningfully when we campaigned around Paris, when a lot of Filipinos were involved with the People's Pilgrimage, including their walk from Rome to Paris, and we collected close to 1 million petition signatures in the Philippines that we brought to Paris. That had been very effective in mobilizing the Philippine delegation into engaging the faith communities as well, and we were able to go into the process that crystallized the Philippine positions towards Paris. So, and the same goes with some countries in Latin America, in Africa, in the Pacific, in Europe, and in North America. So we saw a for me being a former negotiator, it's easy to be skeptical around the impact of the work of faith communities to political institutions. But I see that the solidarity and the way that faith-based communities have come together to work on the climate issue has become more meaningful and has become really powerful. So I think the key lies in faith communities standing together and engaging governments and including this political platform in the UNFCCC, because that's the only way we're going to be effective. And I can say, yeah, we can make it happen. In Paris, we know because of the kind of profile that this has attained, the whole interfaith movement on climate change. We were able to meet with President Hollande, and he welcomed us into Paris as pilgrims arrived in Paris. So it means a lot, and I think we should continue to believe that we can make a difference by standing together.
Yeah. Thanks for that, Jeb. I've also actually, it's interesting because in a conversation with some negotiators, I have heard something like that as well. That particularly when the negotiations can get locked on very political issues, they can get very locked and entrenched, and sometimes only non-political forces from outside can help to unlock and shift the energy, so that the conversations, that the dialogue can start again. So that's really useful. Thank you. I'll finally invite Reverend James. Hi. So we started with Fiji because this is the Fijian presidency, and I'd like us to finish with Reverend James also as a representative of Fiji. Reverend James, it's been noted that we're here in the Talanoa space in the Bond Zone, and as Giulia mentioned, the important kind of political dialogue that will take place next year on assessing where we are at globally and where we need to go to get in line with the Paris Agreement is now being referred to as the Talanoa dialogue. And Talanoa is a Fijian word. Can you explain to us what it means and why you think that's important for the political negotiations here?
Thank you. That's one of the issues that need to be addressed in this year's COP. We're hoping for agreement on the facilitated dialogue process. Talanoa is a combination of two words or two phrases, or it's a phrase with two words. Tala is the telling of stories or the deep sharing of one's heart, and Noa is about giving space, personal space, communal space, environmental space. So when you put those two words together, Tala and Noa, Talanoa is about having respectful, attentive listening in a space that is safe for people to share their stories, their narratives, and what's deep within their hearts. This means that the process of dialogue must be inclusive. Everybody's voice needs to be heard. Everybody's voice needs to be respected. And the Talanoa process also means the agenda is open to the concerns that are raised in that dialogue process. One of the problems that we have in a Western-oriented or Northern sort of concept of meetings is you've got your agenda set, we've got to hit this, and we've got to be out of here by this time. The Talanoa process means as issues are raised, issues of concern are raised, those are seriously noted and taken on board and brought into the general conversation. And the conversation ends when everybody has an understanding. So it's working for a common understanding, a common goal. Another way of looking at it is trying to achieve consensus. When you have consensus, when you have people resonating with what's being said, you get stronger actions, stronger commitments that are then able to be acted out in very real sense. So that's really the understanding of Talanoa and why it's so important for the work that we're doing in terms of addressing climate change.
Absolutely. No, thank you for that. I think it was definitely worth unpacking, exploring what does Talanoa mean and why is that so relevant to the UNFCCC process. So we can only hope that that the Fijian presidency will be able to really continue to bring that spirit of Talanoa to the negotiations throughout 2018. Thank you so much for sharing.
Pleasure.
So we've got some questions now, and thank you for those. So question, Giulia, can you join me again? So we've got a question here for Giulia. Not sure where this is coming from, my apologies. The question is 2015 statistics for developing countries versus developed countries on the amount of clean energy investments are the same. Please, what are your concerns about the developing countries? I'm sorry, that's actually from Connie. Thank you, Connie. So 2015 statistics for developing countries versus developed countries on the amount of clean energy investment are the same. What are your concerns with respect to developing countries?
With respect to developing countries, the concerns, of course, are mostly related to the issue of energy access. When we talk about investment on renewable energy, we need also to perceive that 3 billion people on the earth don't have access to energy. And this is a very big issue in order to make sure that there is a sustainable development for all. So what we ask as a development organization is to make sure that all the public finance that is going into investment in energy access needs to be safe, affordable, decentralized, and modern. And this is all a very, very important elements for making sure that people get access to clean cooking, to electricity, and as well as for smallholder farmers who needs the energy for agriculture too. So this is one of the main elements and concerns when we talk about investments.
Great. Just one follow-on question from that, about how many countries coming out of this conference have committed to 100% renewable energy, also from Connie.
Well, coming out of this conference, I'm not sure if there will be actually announcements on the commitment of countries with 100% renewable energy, but we've seen in the past years countries like Costa Rica, Uruguay, and Europe, even Scotland, well, also Germany, Sweden, they have quite promising and interesting long-term strategy pathways to phase out from fossil fuels and run 100% renewable energies. So on the one hand, we also see the investments in renewable energy that have declined, and there are really positive signals. But the issue here is, again, urgency, and those signals then needs to become stronger, and the pathways needs to come faster.
Thank you for that, Giulia. Tomas, can I invite you to come and join me for the second question? And this is from Diolinda. Thank you, Diolinda. So it's a question about this idea of systemic and individual attitudinal change. So we've talked a bit about that, and the question from Diolinda is, have we got any concrete examples of what that might be? So I suppose that might speak to the Laudato Si pledge and the tracker and things like that. So you might be able to answer to that a little. And the second half of the question is it time that Catholic and all other churches started preaching to the rich and super rich about bringing the conversion of Zacchaeus? So I'll let you have a go and I'll follow on. Thanks.
Great, excellent. So and the first question was about
Concrete
examples of both systemic and individual.
Yeah, concrete examples of the individual.
So a nice example, if you're asking about an example, so a resource that is being prepared is an example from the Diocese of Monterey in California. It's a diocese where there's a wonderful group, the Romero Institute, that is supporting the diocese and all the Catholic parishes of the diocese to take bold climate action. They've gone, I believe, already 100% renewable in the whole diocese, or are working towards that. And most importantly, they're combining that together. On one side, education of the parishioners and engagement with Laudato Si and those individual changes. But the most novel thing, I think, of that example is the systemic change. So they're engaging the whole town, they're in the Monterey County, to decarbonize their whole electricity system, their whole energy system. And they've been pretty successful. Apparently in California, there's some laws that allow you to, I can't remember the name, but they allow the local community to decide how their energy is sourced. And they've been very successful at mobilizing the local diocese together with broader civil society at a local level to decarbonize their energy system. So there are some nice examples like that one. Actually, the Monterey case is being written up right now, so we should have a written case study about that story pretty soon, so stay tuned for that. And that's a very clear example of what we're trying to do. We want to have many dioceses across the globe to do exactly what they did, especially thinking of that San Francisco summit. We need to show examples of how the church is responding to this. And on the last question, yes, it's time for the church to be talking to the rich and super rich because their carbon footprint is usually massive. But still, it's not about putting blame on somebody else. I think we all need to undergo drastic lifestyle changes. And so I think it's up to all of us. We need to see, Laudato Si emphasizes that we're one human family and we should be working together, and we all need to undergo significant changes.
Thanks for that, Tomas. And just, I suppose, an example, another example I might mention that links the individual and systemic change is fossil fuel divestment, which GCCM is also doing a lot of work on. So, I mean, some of the participants on the webinar here today may have already divested or are actively thinking about it. And by individually divesting our own investments, we make a really important individual change. It's a really important part of living our values. But to be able to link that to systemic change, we need to talk about it. So we need to make our decision public, talk about why we've done it, talk to our peers, encourage them to do the same thing. And by doing that, we elevate the idea that fossil fuels are no longer acceptable. And that can have a huge impact both within, whether it's financial markets, but particularly in the political processes. If political decision makers start to understand that actually there's a huge swathe of constituencies out there that are not willing to accept a fossil fuel future, that can have a big impact on the political decisions that they're going to take. They do respond to what are the electorate thinking about, what are they doing. So that's another concrete example of how we can link individual and systemic change. Tomas, stay where you are. Another question for you. So you mentioned interfaith work here with various Christian groups. Has there been any evidence of active engagement from groups such as the Muslim faith, Jewish representatives? Another question, how are the faith-based leaders being accepted by the leaders at COP23 in terms of suggestions and collaboration? So how are you managing to get the messages through, I guess? There's another question there, but maybe take those two first. Thanks.
Okay. So on the first one, yes, we are seeing there's a wonderful network called it's our Muslim counterpart. It's called GCMN, or it's Global a Climate Muslim Network, and they're kind of our counterpart, trying to bring together the Muslim community and taking climate action. And they're doing good work. They're getting started. They started later than us. So that's happening. The Muslim community is stepping up. And there are a few countries like Morocco, Indonesia, Jordan, where there's very active work of greening the mosques, of getting the mosques to go 100% renewable. So there's some, I haven't seen I'm not aware of the details, but I know there's a lot of mosques that are going 100% renewable. So that's on the Muslims. On the Jewish community and other communities, there are several groupings for all the different faith traditions that are working. This interfaith statement last Friday, all of them were there. There were rabbis, there were imams, they were viewed as representatives, et cetera, et cetera. So yes, we're seeing a lot. I mean, different faiths are at different stages of their journeys, but there's very clear commitment from everybody to do something, and to do it urgently as we need it. And the second question was on.
Do you have a sense that your messages are getting through? Are they filtering through to the political makers here?
You could arguably say that Pope Francis, with his Laudato Si message, had a massive impact in 2015 and continues to have an impact. So I think that the faith boys, I mean, I'm not sure of other churches. I don't want to speak for them. I'm not sure of the details. But in terms of the Catholic community, I think Laudato Si has resonated very profoundly. Even if I think that public awareness of Laudato Si is still not that high in places or venues like this one, everybody knows what Laudato Si is. Everybody knows that Pope Francis made a very vocal, bold call for action. So, and I think that governments have heard that. Of course, we need to connect the dots between what the Pope is saying and what Catholic voters say and care about. Because unfortunately, politicians, they might pay attention to what is coming out from the Vatican, but ultimately they will care about what their constituents ask them. So that's where our role, the role of all the viewers today in this webinar is, we need to get this message delivered to our respective governments. Wherever you are, in whatever continent you are, raising your voice for climate justice matters. And if you do it from a Catholic perspective, that matters. So please do it. At a local level, engaging your local city town hall or city government. At a national level, engaging your national government. Please do that, and encourage your local church to do so.
That's a nice note to finish on, Tomas. Thank you. My apologies. We have a few more questions, but we've run out of time. So we will respond to those questions individually, just not collectively via the webinar. So those who had the questions, you can stay online and we'll try to come back to you. And I'd just like to say thank you to all of you for joining us. And I'd like to, a special thanks also to all of our speakers who really gave us a real flavour and sense of what's going on here at the COP, both within the political negotiations and outside of them also. And just to reflect again on what Reverend James was saying, that we're in the Talanoa space. And the idea of Talanoa, that Fijian concept, and what it can and should bring to all our conversations around climate change, climate justice within the COP and outside of the COP. So wishing you all very well, and we look forward to seeing you again soon. Thanks.
Bye. Thanks.